Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Mr. Liu, on your nomination, and it's great to see your family here today. And I definitely have a lot of fiscal financial questions for you. But, you mentioned in your opening statement about Medicare and getting the delivery system right. The President last night mentioned that in his State of the Union address as well, about focusing on quality as opposed to frequency and tests. And I was curious, were you involved in the, as Chief of Staff, in the discussion of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act?
Senator, both in my time at OMB and as Chief of Staff, I did pay attention to the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Enacting the law was a critical step, but implementing it is necessary in order for it to be in place.
Do you think that if there's a provision of the Affordable Care Act that is supposed to be implemented in 2014, that it should be implemented in 2014?
We have been working very hard to be on schedule to getting the exchanges set up and having the Affordable Care Act in place in 2014. Many departments have been involved in that, in addition to the Department of Treasury, the Department of HHS, Department of Labor, the Office of Personnel Management. And it was not always easy because we had to work mighty hard to get the funding to implement on schedule. But I feel we're in a pretty good place.
Well, there's one provision that's not being implemented, the Basic Health Plan. And I know the President's tried to express an opinion to help push things along, but I guess my question is, do you think if the Affordable Care Act specifies that the Basic Health Plan should be implemented in 2014, that it should be implemented in 2014? And I guess I'm also asking, is there a bias somewhere in the administration against lower cost managed care delivery systems that the Act calls for in exchange for the exchange? Is there a bias over there that somehow the Affordable Care Act means implementing only those pages related to the exchange and punting everything else, even though they have been more cost-effective delivery systems?
Senator, I am not aware of any such bias. I do know that there's been an enormous amount of work to get the exchanges set up and the various parts of the kind of architecture. I'd be happy to follow up and work with you on that specific issue and find out where it is in the kind of queue and follow up on that.
I think I would greatly appreciate that. I think there is a very big concern on my part and several other members that somehow people may be asking states to forego what have been more cost-effective solutions for that population just above the Medicaid level, in exchange, and almost maybe even making it more expensive and putting those states, pushing that population onto the exchange as some holy grail. And I can tell you that we think it should be implemented, and it should be implemented now. So I certainly will take you up on that. I want to turn to financial issues. You and I have had a chance to talk, and we could talk for hours, but just so everyone understands your philosophy on the regulatory side of things, do you believe in the reimplementation of Glass-Steagall?
Senator, as we discussed when we had this conversation, Glass-Steagall had been over the years become something of an anachronism, and much of the activity in the financial world had gotten beyond it. And I think the problems we had in the leading up to the financial crisis were evidence that our financial regulatory system did not keep pace with the growing complexity of the financial system. And I think Dodd-Frank was a critically important step to reasserting proper regulatory oversight of an industry that's critical to the health of our economy. I think as we go forward, we have to ask questions as we complete the implementation of Dodd-Frank, are there more actions that are needed? And they have to be actions that make sense in 2013. So I think going back, while I'm a student of history and New Deal history in particular is of great interest to me, I don't think it's just resuscitating a 1930s statute. It's a question of what do we need to do to manage the financial challenges.
So I'll take that as a no. And to that point, I mean, I don't see how you contain this issue as we now see the CFTC and the treatment of swaps and futures as different clearing measures. Aren't you worried that that's going to provide more systemic risk as well?
You know, I think that if you look at the issues, things like margin requirements for swaps, it's very important that we get on top of regulating things that create systemic risk. And I didn't mean to be answering the prior question yes or no. I think it's just a little bit more complicated. I think the question of is there a need for any further consideration of financial regulation is one that just comes in sequence after implementing Dodd-Frank. And I come to the issue open-minded, knowing that we can't let what happened leading up to 2008 happen again. We can't let a regulatory system become outstripped by the complexity and organization of a financial system, which our economic life depends on.
Well, I'll look for more discussion on that point then. Two other issues I wanted to bring up. I just don't understand the administration's idea of capping the municipal bond tax deduction at 28%. If we want to encourage more investment, one thing I do believe the federal government does is provide cheap capital, whichever way. And when all these banks are putting all these monies into derivatives, and you can't convince me that they're really interested in the bottom line here. So to me, a policy on capping the municipal bonds at 28%, tax-exempt bonds, I'm curious as whether you're going to continue that policy. And also on the Foreign Investment and Real Estate Act, whether you think the Treasury Department is going to complete that IRS notice and take action that would help jumpstart private investment.
Senator, the administration's proposal, which would have limited the value of deductions in the top tax bracket to 28%, was designed to try and restore some equity in the tax code and to generate revenue that we need for meeting our fiscal targets. It wasn't specifically directed at municipal bonds or at other specific areas of tax activity. It was also meant to be a placeholder that we really should have tax reform, and we should make specific policies deciding what's in and what's out and what the proper tax rates are. But we put it in as a fallback, saying that if tax reform doesn't happen, this is something that would help us to get to the revenue targets we need. I'd be happy to follow up with you on these issues of the individual component parts of tax reform, but I would say as a general proposition that the hard decisions in tax reform will in many cases put us in places where there are things that many of us are sympathetic to, where we have to curtail tax benefit if we're going to broaden the base. And I think as a general rule, if there were a lot of easy decisions, tax reform would have happened a long time ago, and I think there are going to be hard choices to make.
And so on the foreign investment, is that something you're going to take action on, or are we going to have to act here?
My understanding is that those rules are progressing. If confirmed, I would pay attention to them and work on them and work with you to get them completed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.